I was going to characterize myself, I'd say I have a very purpose-driven leadership style.
Okay.
And my brother, who is the co-author of the book, he's a duly licensed funeral director. And he's graduated from the Cincinnati College of Mortuary Science. He currently is running a large funeral home out in Idaho. And he and I came together about 2.5 years ago and decided to write. Actually, we didn't decide to write a book. We decided to start a consulting company with the intent on helping leaders understand and preparing them to deal with grieving employees when they return to work. And as people got exposed to what we were doing and what we were talking about, what we were training, we got several folks who had said, you guys ought to write a book about this. And so we did. And the book was published in October is when it was released on Amazon. And so sort of here we are.
Awesome.
Oh, that sounds awesome. That's amazing.
Yeah.
But I wasn't expecting funeral director.
Right.
Yeah. So it's ironic because 28 of the 31 years that I spent with Hillenbrand, I was actually in the Batesville Casket Company side of the business. So I was in the casket business from a supply side, and my brother was in it from a funeral director side. So it was kind of strange how we both wound up in the same industry.
So is that where you got grieving from?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Was that where you got grieving?
Well, yeah. So through our own personal experiences, both with grief in our own lives, and then myself leading others who were grieving, we decided that there was a real gap here from a leadership perspective. Nobody there. This is not taught in any business schools anywhere, right? Nobody teaches a leader what to say when an employee comes in and says, "I've been diagnosed with cancer." And so I experienced it personally from a leadership perspective. In fact, some of the very initiatives that I was responsible for implementing on my side of the business, like closing plants, caused people to grieve. And I learned that I had to help those people through that. They weren't necessarily resistant to change.
Yeah.
They were just grieving. And if I could help them through the grief, we would both be better off. And so, and my brother from his side of the business, and this may surprise you, it surprised me, but the number one thing that he hears from family members when he deals with them on the funeral side of the business is that they're dreading going back to work because they're just not ready. Mm-hmm. Emotionally, they know that their hearts and minds are not in a good spot.
Yeah.
They're dreading how people are going to react or ignore their situation. They're dreading what they may hear from their boss. They're dreading the workload that's piled up. And so we came together a couple of years ago and we said, we should put together our collective experience and training and try to do something about this.
Okay. Yeah, that's good.
That is actually, now that I'm listening to it and hearing it from you, from your perspective, I see why this was needed, because you are right. There are a lot of people, especially in leadership, that just don't know how to talk to people, let alone in a situation where an employee has lost their life, or even a family member of an employee has lost their life. And how do you, help them at the workplace? So no, this is definitely good.
Yeah. And one of the things that, so there were a couple of things that stuck out when we did our research. One was how narrowly defined grief typically is, right? Most people define, if I were to say, give me the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the word grief or grieving, you would say the loss of a loved one or a death. Mm-hmm. And the reality is, grief is caused by any emotionally traumatic event that is significant enough to alter a person's reality. So if you think about a significant illness diagnosis, a divorce, domestic abuse, unfortunately, just here the other day, there was a mass shooting in Indianapolis. My home is in Batesville, Indiana. So Indianapolis is just up the road. And there was a mass shooting there 2 days ago. You got the situation in Boulder. You got the situation down in Atlanta. Yeah. All of those things even though you may not have lost someone in those events,
Mhm.
people are grieving the loss of their sense of security, safety. I know I had my wife's brother's daughter, so my niece, I guess it would be my niece through marriage, called and said, "Oh my God, we used to shop in that store where that shooting took place in Boulder. My son used to go there after school to get snacks. Thank God we moved 2 weeks ago because he may have been in the store."
Right, right.
So you just never know. And you just never know what's going on in people's lives in general, right? That they are struggling with, from financial struggles to group COVID isolation. And so, as we research this is a pretty big deal, right? It costs companies $75 to $100 billion a year in lost productivity. And some studies would say there might be as many as 1 in 4 people who are grieving on any given day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's a big number.
That is. Oh my gosh.
And no one
See-
would have thought about like what he said about like even just losing a job.
Right.
How does that affect someone or family members? You just know, you say you never know what someone's going to do or what they're going through.
Well, because I mean, especially when you have a family and you got kids, you got, wife, and and they're dependent on you, for the income to come in, and you lose your job, and it's like, oh my God, what am I going to do?
Yeah, because we were watching it. We
Right.
were just talking about this earlier, and I'm actually this ties into what we were talking about. How there has been, was it 140 something mass shootings in the United States just this year, and 45 just in the month of April.
Yeah. I'm putting together a presentation for a webinar, and I pulled that map. I've put that map in the presentation because, we think it only impacts the person who lost someone.
Yes.
But the reality is everyone who worked in that facility is a different person today than they were before that shooting took place.
No question.
Man.
And leaders need to understand how to deal with that, right? And there's absolutely no training out there that whose sole purpose is to help leaders understand how to deal with folks when they've had an emotionally traumatic event strike their lives.
And just by my experience when it comes to management, there the management that I've encountered, they don't have the training. They don't have training
Right.
when it comes to the employee going through or grieving about something or a death or whatever's going in their life, and the manager actually says some things that doesn't line up to about comforting them.
It wasn't sensitive.
Right. It wasn't, it wasn't sensitive to them. It was more so like they're in that management role. It's like, okay, well, you still have to make sure that you're here at work. You still have to make sure that you're doing this, and when I hear that, I'm like, oh my gosh, what is this?
Right.
Gosh.
Right.
How
Yeah,
sad.
I could share some examples with you that you'd shake your head and go, "Oh my God, I can't believe people said that."
Mhm.
But when it is done well, and quite frankly, we took the title of the book, "How Leaders Can Help Grieving Employees Excel at Work," from an example of a woman who we talked to who works for a major corporation, and her husband, her story appears in chapter 8 of the book. We changed her name to Becky in the book.
Okay.
And her corporation handled her beautifully through a very difficult time of losing her husband to a second bout of colon cancer. And as we were talking, she made the comment that her company not only helped her through the situation, they actually helped her to excel at work while she was grieving. And so her story is actually how we got the title of the book. And the moment she said it, I said, if you don't mind, we're probably going to borrow that line from you. And she was fine with it.
Yes.
But that's an example of an organization who handled it well in her case. And I mean, just wonderfully, to the point where while her husband, and please stop me if I'm talking too much here, but
Not a problem.
while her husband was in hospice care, dying from cancer, she also had to re-interview for her job. They were doing a reorganization in the organization, and nobody was guaranteed a job. Anyway, she went through the process. She didn't know how it went. And I'll make a long story short. She got a call from her human resource manager.
Mm-hmm.
And the human resource manager said, look, I'm getting out of ahead of myself here, but we want you to know that you will have a job, and you'll be able to work for us for as long as you want. There'll be an offer coming in a week, which was a wonderful thing. But then she said, are you with your husband? And the girl said, yes, I am. And she said, that's good, because the reason I called you was because we wanted you to be able to tell your husband that you have a job and he does not need to worry about where you will be earning a living before he passes.
Wow.
So they were that aware of the situation to even extend it to your husband is worried about this and he doesn't need to be worried about this. And we want you to be able to tell him that so he can stop worrying about it.
Right.
So they handled her very, very well.
Yeah.
But even she said, if I had worked for another leader, I'm not sure if I would have been treated the same way. Mm-hmm. Even within a company that dealt with it very well, she could think of several leaders that it would not have played out the same way had she been working for them.
Yeah, exactly.
Because management is the reason why most people do leave jobs. Not even talking about like this aspect as far as grief, but just keeping employees, period. You can have a bad job as long as that management treats you right. Hey, they treat me right here. It's not the best, but I'm okay. Or you can have the best job you thought in the world, and then management just is not there. Right. Not there to help, right. Not there to help, excel you, whatever it is. And that can cause you more grief, as that's another form of it, management. So
wow. So when you started to write this, the art of the dying art of leadership, when you wrote that, after writing all this, did it give you a different perspective?
Oh, most definitely. On a couple of levels. On a very personal level, my brother and I learned an awful lot about each other and how we both grieved the situations that occurred in our lives, the loss of our dad. So in the book, you'd read that our father passed away when he was 53 from pancreatic cancer. So 31 days from diagnosis, he was gone. Wow. I was 28. My brother was 18. And we share that story of that grief in our life. And then some 20 years later, our mother passed away from a second bout with breast cancer. And we share that grief in our life. And so it was very interesting because even though my brother and I were close, we never really talked about what each other was feeling and dealing with as we went through this. Mm-hmm. So it was really interesting as I read when he told the story from his perspective in the book and compared it to when I wrote my part of the story. It was really interesting to better understand how we both grieved very differently, but the same issues were present in our lives at those times. Mm-hmm. And so that was one piece of the learning. And then the other was, after having written the book, I realized that I was guilty of falling into the trap of sort of paying lip service to people when they were in trouble. I mean, we've all probably had the experience when we're walking through the grocery store and we see a friend or someone we know, and we know that that person is going through a difficult time in their lives. And the first thing that goes through our mind is, boy, I hope this person doesn't see me because I really don't want to talk to them. I don't know what to say to them, right? So we spend the rest of the time trying to make sure we're never in the same aisle as that person, right?
Right.
I was guilty of that. And so after having written the book, I'm much more aware of how I am behaving in these situations, um, and making sure that, the classic thing to tell somebody is, well, call me if you need something. Well,
Yes.
that is a worthless thing to say, right? They're never going to call you, and you don't actually want them to call you, right? But it's what you're supposed to say.
Right.
And so I'm very careful not to say that. Um, and when I'm thinking about somebody, or when somebody pops into my head, instead of just, reaching out and saying, how you doing? I will pick up the phone and call them now and tell them, hey, I just wanted to hear your voice. How are things going?
Right.
Those kinds of things. So I'm very personally aware now of my response and my reaction in these situations.
It's ironic that you actually said that, because I have pulled that up in your book. You had a chapter 6, the role of aftercare, and it says
Yeah.
what not to say. I see that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I see that. That's actually ironic, 'cause I was just reading through that. Don't say it, things like at least, or don't mention God. Don't not offer simple condolences, like what he was just mentioning.
Mhm.
Oh, give me a call, because that's what we find ourselves saying all the time. Oh, my condolences. I'm so sorry. We're gonna be there for you. It's like there's only so much you can say.
It's become a tradition. It's become a
Yeah,
habit that we
habit.
have and everything. And just by learning these things can help, us break those habits and break those things that will be a better fit, for the person. So,
Right. Absolutely. And, part of it is people try to be way too profound in
Mhm.
these situations, and they really just need to sit and listen more than they talk.
mhm.
And they need to not just say words, but take action, right? It's one thing to say, hey, call me if you need something, or if there's anything you need, just ask.
Mhm.
That's one thing. But what the person really needs is somebody to just show up and cut their lawn without telling them they're coming, or bring them a meal,
Mhm.
or, right, do something, right? Don't just say to somebody who lost their job, well, hey, let me know if there's anything I can do to help you, right? Say, why don't you send me your resume? I'll look it over, and I'll put it out in my network to see if there's anything available for you, or I'll keep my ears open for you. Take an action. That's, we always hear actions speak more loudly than words.
Show,
And
not say.
that is more than true in this instance. When you're dealing with somebody who's been through a traumatic event,
Mhm.
words are not actually very comforting.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I've experienced that. Oh yeah. Um, the on page what's that? Page 101.
Mm-hmm.
It talks about the person in the mirror.
Yeah.
Well, what is that? What was that?
So, it's one thing for leaders to struggle leading others who have experienced an emotionally traumatic event, but the person in the mirror is a chapter dedicated to what if it's actually the leader
Mm.
who's had the emotionally traumatic event or experienced the loss and
Mhm.
is grieving?
Mhm.
How should the leader behave if they're the one grieving,
Oh.
right? If they're the one that's been traumatized.
Mhm.
And it's something that we never talk about, right? That we don't even think about, right? We just assume leaders are these, superhuman people, and just like everybody else, right? They can check their personal lives at the door, and they can be the gracious leader, that you want them to be, and care for everybody around them. But what happens when they're the one that's struggling? And the point we make in the book is that the model that we offer in uh, chapter 7 and 8, the adaptive leadership model, works in reverse, right? The
Mhm.
leader, the things that we tell leaders to do when they are leading someone who is grieving are to engage them early, right? And listen more than you speak, be with compassion and empathy,
Right.
adapt your leadership style, right? Don't just assume the person's going to be able to check their feelings at the door.
Mhm.
um, Take what you've heard don't just say, well, let me know if we can help you, but actually begin to think about ways that you can restructure the work or the assignments or the work hours, whatever would make it more, demonstrate more support for this person at their time of need. Involve the team, because the team wants to help, but they want to help this person, but they won't know how. So involve the team.
Mm-hmm.
And gosh, be vulnerable, right? The only way somebody's going to talk with you is if you yourself are vulnerable and are be willing to admit that you understand that there's no way you can wrap your head around what's happening in their lives.
Empathy.
And so that's the model we teach. The same thing is true if it's the leader, right? If the leader's grieving, they need to be vulnerable, and they need to engage the team, and they need to talk about it, and they need to share it with the team, and they need to let the team help. The same things, the same principles apply, although leaders tend to think that they're not supposed to show their emotion at all while they're at work. They're just supposed to keep it all bottled up inside. And the point of chapter 9 is, actually, that's the worst thing you could do, right? The thing that will make your team more cohesive, more productive, more engaged, increase morale, is if you're vulnerable and you open up and you let the team help. Because you're setting a tone, you're developing a culture then that will extend well beyond after the event is over and the trauma is over and the grieving's over. Your team will actually behave differently in the future. And all of those feelings of, hey, I work for a pretty good person. Wow, they were real. They're a real human being, and they treat me like a real human being. All of those things that impact morale, productivity, engagement, all of those things will continue on after the event is over if the leader will just be vulnerable and follow the model.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
This is a great time for this book to come out,
It really is.
because COVID and what we've been going through in this last year, even just on the stance of domestic violence, that has increased substantially during this last year. So that's some other things that you can still get from this book as well. From what I'm seeing here, is just to deal with stuff like that as well.
Yeah, any type of grieving that will that you can help someone with is, I mean, it means a lot, especially when Anthony was talking about just listening. That's a big thing.
Because he even got stats in here. Every 13 seconds, there's one divorce in America. That equates to 277 divorces per hour.
Oh, wow.
Oh man, he's got. Hey, they say he's got numbers. I like
Right.
that you have that in here.
And frankly, those numbers, the numbers in the book are understated, quite frankly, because we assume that only one person is impacted by all of those events, and we know that's not true. So yeah, it's been very interesting, and you guys are right. There's a lot going on right now. I was on the phone with the president of a company here in Indiana, and it was actually a pretty amazing discussion, because he said, I get it. My people are grieving, right? They're grieving the fact that we lost 70% of our business during COVID. We had to lay a bunch of people off. They're grieving the fact that we had to restructure. They're grieving the isolation from COVID and the fact that they're working from home, and it's like they can't separate home from work anymore. They're grieving that they're not traveling. They're grieving that they're not visiting customers. And now they're grieving that we think we're going to get 80% of the growth of the company back in 2021. And so we have to go hire 400 people. And what I'm hearing from my people is, my God, what more do you want from me?
Yeah.
And so there's a CEO who actually sort of got it and recognized what was going on. Unfortunately, many do not, right? Many are just managing the numbers, and people are just sort of replaceable cogs in the big machine. and it's sort of get over it and get on with it, because it's not my job to help you through this. It's my job to manage your performance. And that is the real issue here, right? So typically what happens, even in the case of a death, which may be more visible than some of these other things, but typically what happens is the leader ignores the situation, right? They think the best thing that they can do is just let it be. Don't bring it up, because this is awkward. This is emotional. This is uncomfortable. I don't want to deal with this. So I'm just going to leave the employee alone and let them work this through on their own. And then performance declines. And then they manage the person's performance. And that frankly just complicates the issue. Right? Because now, in addition to whatever else the person had going on, now they feel their job is being threatened or is in jeopardy. And so that never really has a good outcome, right? Because either the boss manages the person out of the organization for performance and may in fact actually get rewarded for that because he addressed the performance issue and he gets recognized for building high performance teams, right? Which is sort of backwards, but that's the reality. Or on the other end of the spectrum, the person leaves because they no longer feel this is a company they want to work for, right? They're just treating me like a number. They don't seem to care for me as a person. Right. So they leave on their own. Or probably the worst case scenario is the employee stays, but they now feel that they work for somebody who doesn't care for them.
Yeah.
Both a leader and a company. And it won't matter what policies you have and what processes you put in place. At the end of the day, you have lost their engagement and some of their discretionary effort, and their performance will never be the same, and certainly will never reach the potential that it could have reached if that situation would have been handled differently.
That's so true.
People lose their job every day for stuff like that.
Yeah.
Especially when you're like, and you've had to fire him.
So there's actually a story in the book when my brother has also owned two businesses, and he made that mistake. He fired someone whose mom was struggling with cancer.
Yeah.
And he didn't realize what was going on, and the guy was late for work and not doing his job, but they weren't talking, right? He didn't do anything that we now have written in this book, and he actually wound up firing the guy. And so you asked me how I was impacted by the book. After we wrote the book, my brother actually called him and sat down with him and apologized to him for having fired him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Leading by example.
Yeah. That's how you do it.
Oh, man.
But
that's good that he did that.
Yeah, and it's like if more people had that type of mindset, oh my God,
have some better jobs.
Oh, you have better employees.
But this is, to me, good going into, because obviously we're coming out of COVID now. COVID is hopefully,
Yeah, let's hope so.
But this is going to be a good thing to go off of moving forward. Mm-hmm. Because especially what we've been going through the last year or so, a lot of this needed. I'm finna read the mess out of this book actually now. So I'm gonna have to borrow this from. You know what? No, I'm gonna go where and buy it. Where do we go get it at?
Amazon. You can get it on Amazon. Yep. Just Amazon Books, The Dying Art of Leadership. You can order it there.
All right. Definitely order mine.
Yes, sir. Hey, so with this whole book and the route you're going with this, now, are you like taking this onto another platform as actually going places and actually training these top managers and everything about the grieving process and how to handle their employees and all that?
Yeah. That's actually a great question, Floyd, because the way this actually unfolded was, our original intent was to start the Grief Leadership Company, which we did start, Griefleaders, and you can go to our website at griefleaders.com and read all about us, who we are, what we do, why we do it, why it matters. Then we got counsel that we should write a book, because we talked to a couple of best-selling authors, frankly, in the leadership space, and both of them said, we've written multiple books in the leadership space. We are unaware that anyone has ever tackled this subject from a leadership perspective.
Yeah, exactly.
There's lots of people who do grief counseling on the individual level. Nobody's ever really tackled this from a leadership perspective. So we started writing the book, which was a fairly arduous, I mean, it took us a year and a half to write the book, research it and write it and get it published. And so now we're in the process of moving from promoting the book to promoting the leadership training company, and the leadership training that we do. And so, yes, you know, the selling copies of the book are awesome, and it will help individuals. But the way that we feel we can really have an impact is if we can go in and really teach leaders, because those leaders will impact many people in their organization, whether those people ever read the book or not. And so that's really the goal. And, you know, the only way we know to measure that, to measure the success of our Griefleaders training program, is really based on the number of people that we help.
Right.
So yeah, we are, if you go to our website, you can engage us there. There's a contact us page, and you can fill out a contact form, and that'll start a complimentary consultation to see if we can help. And if your organization, frankly, is ready for this, because one of the things that we've learned in this process is, while absolutely every single organization needs this, the vast majority of organizations probably are not ready for this yet, right?
Wow,
because they're still they haven't reached that point of realization that CEO that I just mentioned earlier, who sort of gets it, right? The companies that are ready for this are the companies that have already made great strides in their policies and their bereavement leave and their flexible time off and their flexible work hours and their emotional well-being policies. But then they go, when they see us, they go, oh my gosh, we've never talked to our leaders about how we want them to behave in these situations.
Right.
Those are the companies that are ready for us to come in. The other companies, you know, we have to have some pretty hard conversations about whether or not, and frankly, we've walked away from business because in the discussion, it became clear that, you know, people wanted to measure the return on investment here. And how are we going to know we're getting our money's worth? Well, you may not have quite evolved to the point where you're really ready to do this, right? This one sort of takes a little bit of a leap of faith. I can give you all kinds of metrics to look at, but did your turnover numbers go down because you brought us in to train, or because of some other reason in your organization, right? So
right.
It's a little bit hard to measure that, but the organizations who get it are typically the ones who have taken great strides to taking care of their people and demonstrating they care about their people. And then they go, oh my gosh, we've not ever talked to our leaders about this.
Right. Awesome, man. Some great information.
That was definitely some great information,
man. But all right, we're about to get up out of here. That's our time.
We do thank you for coming on. You know, this is the second week, so we do apologize, but we do thank you for bearing with us and coming on to talk with us and letting us know about this book here.
Well, it's absolutely my pleasure. Thank you guys so much for allowing us to tell our story and to get the word out about grief in the workplace. And certainly, you know, if you guys, if the reviews of this show warrant it and you ever want to have me back on, just reach out. I'd be more than happy to come back on.
Definitely.
Oh, yes, most definitely.
Yeah, we'll definitely have you back on. So we'll definitely be back in contact with you about that as well.
All right. Super. Thanks so much, guys.
All right. Thank you so much.
Have a wonderful evening.
You bet. Bye-bye.